You think you know your life, your love, your family. You build decades on a foundation of trust, laughter, and shared dreams, believing nothing could ever shatter it. But what if the very people you nurtured, the flesh and blood you brought into this world, turned out to be monsters? What if the man you loved, your steadfast partner for over 40 years, didn't simply die, but was taken from you, and the truth was buried deeper than his coffin? This isn't a story from a distant land or a forgotten past. This is my life, heng, and what I endured will make you question everything you thought you knew about betrayal, greed, and the chilling darkness that can lurk within the closest of bonds. Prepare yourself, because my nightmare began not with a sudden tragic loss, but with a whisper from the grave, revealing a deception so profound it would tear my very soul apart, proving that some secrets are meant to stay buried, but others demand to be unearthed, no matter the cost. A whisper from the grave. At 66 years old, I had already witnessed my fair share of life's trials and tribulations, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the earth-shattering revelation that was about to unfold. The day of my husband Ernest's funeral was, without a doubt, the quietest, most profoundly desolate day of my entire existence. The world seemed to hold its breath around me, draped in a suffocating silence that amplified every beat of my aching heart. We stood there, under a sky that mirrored the grey void within me, the cold, damp earth clinging to our shoes as Ernest's casket was slowly, irrevocably lowered into its final resting place. It was a scene etched in my memory with brutal clarity, every detail a cruel reminder of the life we had shared and the future that was now irrevocably stolen from me. The solemn words of the pastor, the mournful sighs of the wind, the heavy thud of earth hitting wood, each sound resonated with an unbearable finality. It was in that precise, agonizing moment, as my world crumbled around me, that a jarring vibration startled me. My hand, already trembling from grief, instinctively reached for my purse, retrieving my old phone. The screen glowed with an incoming message from an unknown number, an anomaly I initially dismissed as a cruel prank or a wrong number amidst my sorrow. But then I read the words, and a chill, colder than the grave itself, shot through my veins, freezing me in place. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. My breath hitched. The world spun. Was this a hallucination, a cruel trick of my fractured mind? With fingers that shook so violently I could barely type, I managed to reply, "Who are you?" The response came almost instantly, and it stole the very air from my lungs, leaving me gasping for comprehension. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." My gaze, disoriented and desperate, snapped towards Charles and Henry, my own children, standing beside the open grave. Their expressions were strangely, unnervingly calm. The tears that traced paths down their cheeks seemed forced, their hugs of condolence as cold and hollow as ice. A sickening dread began to coalesce in the pit of my stomach. Something was profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. The messages had torn my soul in two, pitting the unimaginable against the undeniable, forcing me to confront a truth so monstrous it threatened to consume me whole. The notion that my own sons, the boys I had raised with every fiber of my being, could be entangled in such a dark conspiracy felt like a betrayal of the highest order, a wound that went deeper than Ernest's death itself. A love forged in simplicity. For 42 years, Ernest had been the unyielding anchor of my life, my steadfast partner, my silent refuge, and the very reason I drew breath each day. Our story began when I was a youthful 24, a time of blossoming dreams and simple aspirations in the sleepy, dust-laden town of Spring Creek. We weren't city folk, chasing grand fortunes or fleeting trends. Our roots were firmly planted in the same sun-baked back roads, and our dreams, though modest, were woven together with the durable threads of shared hope and quiet ambition. I remember those early days vividly. I cleaned houses, my hands rough from scrubbing, to support my ailing mother, while Ernest, with a gentle strength, repaired bicycles in the small, beloved shop he had inherited from his father. We were poor, yes, by the world's measure, but our lives were rich beyond measure. We possessed a treasure that money could never buy, a genuine, enduring love that warmed our meager existence and made every hardship bearable. The memory of the first time Ernest spoke to me remains as vivid as if it happened yesterday. It was a Tuesday morning, crisp and bright, as I made my way to the market, my faded green dress a familiar comfort, and my worn-out shoes whispering against the dusty path. Ernest stepped out of his shop, his hands smudged with grease, a testament to his honest work. He smiled, a shy, hesitant curve of his lips that instantly captured my heart and made me fall head over heels. "Good morning, Shi Heng Yi," he murmured, his voice soft, a melody of kindness. "Need me to check out your bike?" I didn't own a bicycle, not a single one, but in that moment, fueled by the intoxicating rush of nascent love, I conjured a flimsy excuse, anything to prolong the sweet torture of talking to him. That innocent exchange, born of a simple question and a hastily fabricated lie, blossomed into a whirlwind of dates beneath the sprawling ancient oak tree in Town Square Park. Those whispered conversations beneath its leafy canopy evolved into promises of eternal love, which culminated in a modest yet profoundly hopeful wedding. The initial years of our marriage were certainly not without their challenges. We made our home in a tiny two-bedroom house, its tin roof a constant reminder of our humble beginnings. When the rains came, a symphony of drips would fill our home, necessitating a scattered collection of pots and pans to catch the relentless leaks. Yet, despite the inconveniences, despite the constant struggle, we were happy. Ernest worked tirelessly, from the first blush of dawn until the last sliver of twilight, his hands perpetually busy in his beloved shop. I, in turn, devoted my days to sewing clothes for the women of the town, my nimble fingers weaving threads of hope into every stitch. Our lives were simple, industrious, and imbued with an unshakable sense of contentment that seemed to defy our circumstances. The fabric of family unravels. Then came the children. When Charles, our firstborn, arrived, a wave of indescribable joy washed over me, a happiness so profound I thought my heart might quite literally burst. He was a truly beautiful baby, a perfect blend of us, with his father's deep, soulful eyes and my own wide, optimistic smile. 2 short years later, Henry graced our lives, just as perfect, just as adored. I poured every ounce of my love, my energy, and my very essence into raising them, sacrificing my own needs without a second thought, believing that their happiness was paramount. Ernest was an extraordinary father, a gentle giant who filled their lives with wonder and practical wisdom. Sundays were reserved for fishing expeditions by the river, where he taught them the patience of the angler and the quiet beauty of nature. He patiently instructed them in the art of fixing things with their own hands, instilling a sense of self-reliance and pride in their abilities. And every night, without fail, he would weave captivating stories that lulled them to sleep, their imaginations soaring on the wings of his words. While Ernest nurtured their spirits and skills, I fed them, dressed them, and offered solace in my arms when their small worlds were overcome by tears. We were, or so I fiercely believed, an unbreakable, intimately connected family, a tight-knit unit woven together by threads of profound love and shared existence. As the boys matured, however, imperceptible fissures began to appear in the perfect facade of our family. Charles, the eldest, possessed an ambition that grew with each passing year, a restless energy that often expressed itself in poignant questions. Why did we live so modestly? Why didn't we own a car like other families in town? His younger brother Henry, ever the shadow, followed Charles's lead in every conceivable way, mirroring his aspirations and echoing his growing discontent. The moment Charles turned 18, Ernest, with a heart full of hope and a desire to pass on his legacy, offered him a job at the bicycle shop. The rejection, swift and laced with undisguised contempt, struck Ernest deeply, a wound he carried silently. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad," Charles had declared, his voice edged with disdain. "I'm going to be someone important." Those words, though never explicitly discussed between us, sliced through Ernest's gentle spirit. I would often find him later, sitting alone on the porch swing in the quiet darkness of night, his gaze fixed on the distant stars, a profound sadness etched into his weary features. His son had not merely rejected the honest work of his hands, he had, in essence, cast aside Ernest's entire way of life, deeming it beneath him. The years continued their relentless march, and to my initial surprise, Charles managed to carve out a name for himself in the cutthroat world of city business. He secured a coveted position at a prominent real estate company, and Henry, ever the follower, soon joined him. Both began accumulating wealth, far more than Ernest and I had ever dared to dream of, a fortune that seemed to grow exponentially before our astonished eyes. At first, an overwhelming sense of pride swelled within my chest. My sons, I believed, had achieved what we never could, transcending the shackles of poverty and constructing a better, more prosperous life for themselves. But gradually, insidiously, that initial burst of joy began to curdle, transforming into a deep, pervasive sadness. Visits home became increasingly infrequent, fleeting glimpses of their new, polished lives, and phone calls grew shorter, punctuated by hurried excuses. When they did grace us with their presence, they arrived in gleaming, expensive cars, their bodies encased in fancy suits, their conversations dominated by abstract terms like investments and properties. They would regard us with a peculiar mix of pity and thinly veiled shame, their eyes subtly conveying a desire for us to somehow disappear into the simpler past they had so eagerly shed. "Mom," Charles suggested during one of their sporadic visits, his voice tinged with a detached concern, "you and Dad really should consider moving somewhere better. This old house is falling apart." He wasn't wrong. The house, with its creaking floorboards and faded wallpaper, bore the scars of decades. But it was more than just a structure. It was the repository of our entire existence, the sanctuary where we had nurtured our sons, shared countless meals, and grown gracefully, resiliently old together. It wasn't opulent, but it was our irreplaceable home, saturated with the memories of a life well lived. Ernest, always the quiet sage, would often confide in me, his voice a low rumble of wisdom. "Heng Yi, money has changed our boys. We simply aren't enough for them anymore." I stubbornly resisted accepting this painful truth, clinging to a desperate hope. I tirelessly justified their prolonged absences, their abbreviated phone calls, their string of broken promises. "They're just busy building their lives," I'd tell myself, a mantra against the encroaching doubt. "Someday, they'll return to being the loving boys we raised." But in the deepest chambers of my heart, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that Ernest was right. We had lost our sons long before I truly lost my husband. I simply had no way of knowing the chilling extent to which we had become utter strangers to them. The cold embrace of disdain. The most stark and painful transformation in our family dynamics arrived with Charles's marriage to Jasmine Albright, a woman who hailed from the city and made no effort to conceal her profound disdain for our simple, unassuming lifestyle. The very first time he brought her to our humble home, her presence was a jarring intrusion. She arrived in impossibly high heels that sank dramatically into the soft, unpaved dirt of our porch, and an elegant red dress that shimmered with an opulence that I instinctively knew cost more than everything I had ever owned combined. "Nice to meet you," she offered, her smile as brittle and insincere as spun glass, barely extending the very tips of her fingers for a fleeting, almost reluctant handshake. Her eyes, sharp and dissecting, swept across our modest dwelling, an expression I couldn't quite decipher, yet one that made me feel acutely small and insignificant. During the dinner I had prepared with so much care and love, Jasmine barely touched her plate. She meticulously pushed the meatloaf around, dissecting tiny pieces of chicken with a delicate precision, but consumed almost nothing. Charles, by her side, seemed a bundle of nerves, constantly offering hushed apologies for aspects of our home and our lives that he had, in years past, never once shown an ounce of shame for. Next time we'll take them out to a restaurant, he whispered to Jasmine, believing his words were private, unheard. But I heard him. Every single word pierced my heart like a shard of ice, a brutal affirmation of the growing chasm between us. Henry, for his part, remained perpetually single, yet effortlessly adopted the same distant, aloof attitude as his elder brother. His visits became a rare, almost ceremonial occurrence, limited strictly to special occasions, and even then, he always exuded an palpable urgency, as if he were perpetually on the verge of rushing off to a far more important engagement. His phone was a constant appendage, his attention perpetually divided as he closed deals and navigated the complexities of his burgeoning career, even as we attempted to converse. "Mom, I have to go," he would invariably declare before it was truly time to depart. "I have a crucial meeting early tomorrow." The cherished tradition of family Sundays. Once the vibrant heart of our week faded into a distant, melancholic memory. Christmases, once warm and overflowing with spontaneous joy, morphed into cold, formal affairs. My sons would arrive bearing expensive, often unnecessary gifts, stay for a predetermined 2 or 3 hours, and then depart with a palpable sigh of relief, leaving Ernest and me to grow old alone, finding solace and comfort only in each other's quiet presence. He continued his work in the shop, his hands, though still capable, no longer possessing their youthful strength. I persisted with my sewing, my eyes too dimming with the passage of time. We managed, making do with our modest income, fiercely proud of our independence, refusing to ask for anything from our outwardly successful sons. "Do you know what the saddest part is, Shi Heng Yi?" Ernest asked me one night, his voice laced with an aching wisdom as we sipped coffee on our familiar porch. "It's not that they have money, it's that the money has made them believe we aren't important anymore." He was right, as he always was. My sons hadn't merely transformed financially, they had undergone a profound, heartbreaking alteration of their very hearts. We were no longer their beloved parents, the guiding figures of their youth. We had become an uncomfortable, inconvenient reminder of a past they were desperate to sever ties with, a past they yearned to forget entirely. The price of our home. The situation spiraled further downward when Charles, in a display of his newfound wealth, purchased a sprawling $200,000 house in an exclusive gated neighborhood within the city. Henry, not to be outdone, soon followed suit, investing in a luxurious condo that cost a staggering $150,000. Suddenly, our sons were not merely successful, they were owners of fortunes we could barely comprehend, living lives utterly detached from the simple existence they had known. "You should really sell this house and move into a retirement community," Jasmine suggested during one of her rare, unwelcome visits, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that grated on my nerves. "There are some truly lovely places for people your age. You'd be so much more comfortable there." The word community struck me with the force of a physical blow. A retirement community? After 4 decades of painstakingly building our home, after pouring every ounce of love and sacrifice into raising these sons, they now wish to relegate us to an impersonal institution. "We don't need a home," Ernest retorted, his voice imbued with the quiet dignity that had always characterized him, a dignity that now bristled with wounded pride. "We are perfectly fine here, in our own house." But I saw the swift, complicit glances exchanged between Charles and Henry. They unequivocally supported Jasmine's cold, calculating suggestion. To them, we had ceased to be parents, individuals worthy of respect and care. We were merely a burden, an inconvenient problem that needed to be neatly solved, and in the most expedient way possible. It was then that their more direct, insistent suggestions began. Charles arrived one day, a sheaf of official-looking papers clutched in his hand, documents he had prepared without so much as a whisper of consultation with us. "Dad, Mom," he began, his voice laced with the artificial sweetness of the perfected fake smile he now effortlessly donned. "I've been thinking quite a bit about your future. This house, honestly, it's worth at most $1,000 in its current state. If you sell it, I could add some money, a generous amount, so you could move somewhere truly better, a much better place." To Ernest and me, there was no place on earth better than the home where we had found such enduring happiness for decades. But Charles, in his detached transactional world, failed to grasp this fundamental truth. For him, everything was reducible to cold, hard numbers, to a quantifiable monetary value. "Besides," he continued, pressing his advantage, "I truly believe Dad should retire from the shop. He's already 70 years old. It's high time he rested." Ernest looked at his son, his eyes brimming with an infinite sadness, a silent plea for understanding. "Son," he replied softly, "working isn't a burden for me. It's what keeps me alive, what gives meaning to my days, what provides purpose." "But you could get hurt," Henry insisted, ever the dutiful echo, reinforcing his brother's argument. "At your age, even a small accident could be very dangerous." Their words, superficially cloaked in concern, held a sinister undertone that I couldn't quite place, an impatience, an unsettling urgency that hinted at something far darker than simple familial care. The months that followed stretched into a tense, unbearable ordeal. My sons intensified their relentless pressure for us to sell the house. They brought real estate agents to our doorstep without so much as a warning, orchestrating appraisals without our explicit permission. They even began to couch their arguments in the language of universal benefit, as if their self-serving desires were somehow for everyone's good. "Look," Charles declared during one particularly uncomfortable dinner, his voice devoid of warmth, "Jasmine and I have decided we want to start having kids soon. We'll need some help with the expenses. If you sell the house and move to a smaller place, that money could serve as an early inheritance for us." An early inheritance. He was asking for our inheritance while Ernest and I were still drawing breath, still living in the very home he wished us to vacate. The sheer audacity of the request rendered me utterly speechless. Ernest, though visibly shaken, maintained his characteristic composure, but I saw the telltale clenching of his jaw, a muscle taut with silent rage. "Son," he stated, his voice low but firm, "when your mother and I pass on, everything we possess will naturally become yours. But while we are alive, our decisions remain our own." "Don't be stubborn," Henry cut in, his voice laced with a harshness I had never before witnessed from him. "You're old now. You can't keep living in the past forever." That night, long after they had departed, Ernest and I stayed up talking until the first slivers of dawn painted the sky. For the first time in our long and devoted marriage, we openly discussed the chilling possibility that our sons were no longer the people we believed we had raised. "Something's wrong, Heng Yi," my husband confided, his eyes filled with a worry I had never seen before. "This isn't just ambition or impatience anymore. There's something much darker, more sinister, behind all this relentless pressure." I had absolutely no idea how profoundly accurate his words were, how chillingly prescient his fears. I could not have imagined that my own sons were meticulously planning something that would irrevocably alter our lives forever. I didn't know that the impending tragedy wouldn't be a random twist of fate, but a meticulously orchestrated conspiracy, conceived and executed by the two people I trusted most in the entire world. The shadow of betrayal. My last truly normal conversation with Charles occurred a mere 3 weeks before Ernest's death. He arrived alone, without Jasmine, and his demeanor was more serious, more guarded than usual. "Mom," he began, settling into the familiar worn chair at our kitchen table, the very table where he had devoured countless breakfasts as a boy. "I want you to know that no matter what happens, Henry and I will always take care of you." At the time, his words offered a fleeting comfort, a brief balm to my anxious heart. But now, recalling them beside Ernest's freshly dug grave, they sent an icy shiver down my spine, a dreadful premonition. Why had he uttered "no matter what happens"? What dark knowledge did he possess that I was so tragically oblivious to? The accident that irrevocably changed everything transpired on a Tuesday morning. a day that began like any other. Ernest had left early for his shop, a ritual he had faithfully observed for over 4 decades, his presence a constant comforting rhythm in our lives. I was in the kitchen, lost in the familiar motions of preparing his favorite lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when the phone shrieked with an urgency that pierced the domestic quiet and sent a fresh wave of ice through my already fragile composure. "Mrs. Hayes?" A voice I didn't recognize inquired, its tone formal and grave. "I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The words blurred into an incomprehensible jumble, like ink dissolving in water. The world ceased its rotation. My legs turned to jelly, threatening to give way beneath me, and I had to clutch desperately at the doorframe to prevent myself from collapsing. What happened? Is he okay? Is he alive? Is he in the ICU? I stammered, my voice a broken whisper. "Ma'am, please come as soon as possible," the voice insisted, offering no further details, only an ominous urgency. The journey to the hospital was a hazy, nightmarish blur. My dear neighbor Doris had to drive me, as my body was racked with such uncontrollable tremors that I couldn't even grasp the car keys. The entire route, my mind valiantly, futilely refused to process the unimaginable reality. Ernest was meticulously careful, obsessive about safety in his work. How could such a catastrophic event have possibly occurred? Upon our arrival at the hospital, Charles and Henry were already there, a fact that struck me as profoundly strange, considering no one had notified them, at least not me, their designated emergency contact. But in my overwhelming desperation and shock, this peculiar detail was lost amidst the swirling fog of my grief. "Mom," Charles said, his voice laced with what seemed like genuine concern as he enveloped me in a surprisingly forceful hug. "Dad is in bad shape. The doctors say one of the machines at the shop exploded. He has severe burns and a traumatic brain injury." Henry's eyes were visibly red, yet something in his expression felt subtly off, out of sync with the gravity of the situation. He seemed more restless, more nervous, like someone anxiously awaiting crucial news, rather than someone consumed by sorrow for their dying father. "Can we see him?" I pleaded, my voice raw with despair. "Only immediate family, one at a time, and for 5 minutes maximum," the nurse explained gently, her eyes filled with a practiced compassion. When I finally entered that sterile ICU room, my heart plummeted into the deepest abyss. Ernest was a fragile, unfamiliar form, tethered to a dozen beeping machines, his face and arms swathed in bandages. I could barely recognize the man who had been my life. His breathing was shallow, labored, an artificial rhythm sustained by the constant, relentless chirping of machinery. I walked slowly, reverently to his bedside and took his hand, the only part of his body that seemed miraculously untouched, still familiar. "Ernest, my love," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm here. Everything is going to be all right. You're going to recover, just like you always do, my warrior." For a fleeting moment, I felt a faint, almost imperceptible squeeze in my hand. His eyelids, though closed, fluttered, a subtle movement beneath the skin. He was fighting. My beloved warrior was fighting with every ounce of his strength to return to me. The next 3 days stretched into an eternity, the longest of my entire life. I practically lived within the sterile confines of the hospital, snatching meager hours of sleep in the uncomfortable, unforgiving chairs of the waiting room. Charles and Henry took turns accompanying me, their presence a constant, unsettling reminder of the unspoken tension that now permeated our family. Yet they always seemed more engrossed in hushed conversations with the doctors, their voices low and urgent, than in offering genuine comfort to their dying father. I overheard fragmented snippets of conversations, elusive words that I couldn't fully comprehend at the time. Henry, his voice sharp and businesslike, inquired about medical insurance, about the exorbitant costs of treatment. Charles, perpetually on his phone, discussed life insurance policies and beneficiaries, his words chillingly detached from the immediate tragedy. "Mom," Charles said to me on the second day, his voice carefully calibrated to sound understanding, "we've reviewed Dad's insurance. He has a life insurance policy for $50,000. There's also a workers' compensation policy that could cover up to $75,000 more. Why, I wondered, was he discussing money with me when Ernest was still clinging to life by a thread? Why was his concern so utterly consumed by insurance policies instead of his father's arduous recovery? I don't care about the money, I retorted, my voice surprisingly harsh, fueled by a surge of desperate anger. I just want your dad to get better. Of course, Mom, he replied, his tone placating. But in his eyes, I saw something I deeply disliked. A cold, calculating glint, a silent abacus clicking away, even as his father lay dying. On the third day, Dr. Patterson, an older man with a kindly, compassionate expression, gathered us in a small antiseptic office, his face etched with grim tidings. Mrs. Hayes, he began softly, his voice heavy with empathy, your husband's condition is extremely critical. The burns have become severely infected, and the head trauma is far more severe than we initially believed. We have to be realistic about his chances. What does that mean? I asked, though my heart, with a terrifying certainty, already knew the crushing answer. It means, he continued, his gaze unwavering, that we need to prepare for the worst. Your husband is in an induced coma. We could theoretically keep him alive indefinitely, but his quality of life, well, it's highly unlikely he will ever regain consciousness. My world, already shattered, collapsed completely around me. 42 years of marriage, an entire life meticulously built together, now, they were telling me, was dissolving into nothingness, fading away like smoke. We want to try everything, I pleaded through choked sobs, no matter the cost, no matter how long it takes. But Charles exchanged a swift telling glance with Henry, a silent communication that deeply unsettled me. Mom, Charles interjected, his voice attempting to convey understanding and reason. We have to be practical. Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden on anyone. A burden? A furious primal rage, a fire I didn't know I possessed, ignited within me. He's your father. He's not a burden. He's the man who raised you, who worked his entire life to give you the best he possibly could. We know, Mom, Henry chimed in, his voice attempting to soothe, yet only adding fuel to my indignation. But we also have to think about you. The medical bills are going to be enormous. They could wipe out all your savings. Again, money, always money. My husband was dying, and they were calculating costs, weighing his life against their financial implications. That night, alone in the stark, sterile hospital room, I cradled Ernest's hand, speaking to him as if he could hear every word, every beat of my tormented heart. My love, I don't know what to do. The doctors say there's no hope, but I can't let you go. I can't imagine my life without you. It was then that something happened, something that still sends shivers down my spine, a moment of profound, inexplicable connection. His fingers moved, ever so slightly, squeezing mine with a force that was almost imperceptible, yet undeniably real. His lips twitched, as if he were struggling to utter something, a final, desperate message, but no sound emerged. I screamed for the nurses, desperate, a wild hope surging through me. He's reacting, he's trying to talk. But by the time they arrived, Ernest had retreated back into his previous, unresponsive state. The nurse checked the monitors, her face impassive, and shook her head gently. Sometimes there are involuntary muscle spasms, Mom. It doesn't mean he's conscious. But I knew what I had felt. Ernest had tried to communicate with me. He had fought with the last vestiges of his strength to tell me something vital. 2 days later, in the desolate early hours of Friday morning, the machine alarms shrieked, a piercing, insistent wail that shattered the hospital's hushed quiet. Lights flashed frantically. Nurses, their faces grim, rushed into Ernest's room. I had been dozing, a fitful, shallow sleep in the hallway, when the terrifying cacophony jolted me awake. No, no, no! I screamed, stumbling towards the room, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The doctors worked feverishly for 40 agonizing minutes, attempting to resuscitate him, but their efforts were ultimately futile. At 4:37 in the morning, Ernest was officially declared dead. The pain that tore through me in that moment was visceral, physical, as if my heart had been brutally ripped from my chest. I collapsed by his bedside, clutching his still warm body, my mind refusing to accept the impossible, that he was truly, irrevocably gone forever. The unveiling of a sinister plot. Charles and Henry arrived at the hospital a mere hour after their father's death. They seemed unsettlingly prepared, almost as if they had been anticipating the call, braced for this moment. They carried a stack of papers, official-looking documents, and a list of phone numbers for local funeral homes. "We've already talked to the Spring Creek Funeral Home," Charles informed me, his voice eerily composed, even as I still wept inconsolably. "They can pick up the body this morning. We also contacted the insurance," Henry added, his tone equally devoid of emotion. "The claim process is already underway. How could they be so efficient, so perfectly organized, so utterly cold, barely an hour after losing their father?" A deep, unsettling alarm bell began to toll in the depths of my being. Something was fundamentally wrong, grotesquely out of place. But my grief, raw and overwhelming, was an impenetrable fog, preventing any coherent thought. The funeral was hastily scheduled for the following Monday. Charles, with a disturbing autonomy, took charge of all the arrangements, largely bypassing my input. He selected the simplest, least expensive casket, opting for the shortest possible service, as if his sole desire was to expedite the entire process, to get it over with as quickly and painlessly as possible. "It's what Dad would have wanted," he rationalized, when I voiced my hurt at being excluded from the decisions. Something simple without a fuss. But that wasn't Ernest. My Ernest, the man who had lived his life with such generosity of spirit, deserved more than this indecent rush to bury him and sweep his memory under the rug. The day of the funeral dawned, a bleak gray canvas mirroring the sorrow in my soul. The sky was overcast and cold, as if even the heavens were weeping for Ernest. I donned my only black dress, the same somber garment I had worn for my mother's funeral years prior. My hands trembled so violently that my dear friend Doris, ever watchful, had to carefully button the tiny fasteners at the back of the dress. "Be strong, heng ye," she whispered, her voice a gentle comfort as she meticulously combed my hair. "Ernest would want to see you strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow, an empty vessel, a shell without a soul. 42 years of marriage, an entire lifetime intertwined, couldn't be buried so easily, couldn't be neatly confined to a small plot of earth. Every object in our beloved home seemed to vibrate with his presence, a constant painful reminder of his absence. His coffee mug still sitting on the kitchen table, his worn tools resting on the porch as if awaiting his touch, his pillow still holding the faint, ghost-like scent of him. When we arrived at the cemetery, I was struck by the surprisingly sparse attendance. I had expected a sea of faces, a gathering of Ernest's co-workers from the shop, more neighbors, more acquaintances, a testament to the life he had lived and the people he had touched. Instead, it was only Charles, Henry, Jasmine, Doris, the pastor, and myself. For a man who had resided for 70 years in the same close-knit town, a man who had extended a helping hand to countless individuals, the funeral seemed strangely, chillingly empty. "Where are the guys from the shop?" I asked Charles, a note of bewilderment in my voice. "We didn't want to bother anyone," he replied quickly, almost too quickly. "Dad was a private person. He would have preferred something intimate." But that wasn't true. Ernest cherished his community. He deeply cared about his neighbors and friends. He would have wanted them to come, to say their final goodbyes. Why had Charles gone to such lengths to make everything so secretive, so rushed, so clandestine? During the brief, almost perfunctory service, I observed my sons with a strange, almost clinical, emotional detachment. Charles maintained a solemn expression, one deemed appropriate for the occasion, but his eyes constantly darted towards his wrist, checking his watch with an undeniable impatience. Henry, too, seemed restless, as if he harbored far more important engagements elsewhere. Jasmine, hidden behind the demure black veil she wore, discreetly checked her phone, her fingers tapping away in a silent betrayal of respect. This, I realized with a crushing blow, was how they were bidding farewell to their father, with impatience and self-absorption. The pastor spoke of eternal life, of well-deserved rest, of reuniting with God. His words, though well-intentioned, felt hollow, utterly devoid of comfort in my shattered heart. I didn't want Ernest to rest in peace. I wanted him to come home with me, for us to continue growing old together, for us to share our evening coffee on the porch, just as we always had. When the moment arrived to cast dirt upon the casket, my legs refused to obey, buckling beneath me. Doris had to gently support my weight as I surrendered to an uncontrollable torrent of sobs. The sound of the dirt hitting the wood was brutally final, conclusively hopeless. It was at that exact soul-crushing moment, standing by my husband's newly dug grave, that my phone vibrated again. A text message from the unknown number. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." My heart, already broken, simply stopped. The letters danced before my eyes, an impossible, surreal hallucination. I was losing my mind, succumbing to the crushing weight of grief. With hands that trembled uncontrollably, I managed to tap out a reply. "Who are you?" The answer materialized immediately. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The phone slipped from my nerveless fingers, falling to the damp earth as if it were burning my skin. Doris instinctively bent to retrieve it, but I stopped her abruptly, my hand clamping down on hers. I couldn't allow anyone else to see those messages. Not yet. Not until I could begin to unravel the terrifying truth of what was unfolding. "Are you okay, Mom?" Charles asked, approaching, his face etched with a worried expression. I stared at him, trying to find some telltale clue in his features. His eyes seemed sincere, but now every gesture, every word, every fleeting expression felt tainted by suspicion, veiled in a sinister ambiguity. "I'm fine," I lied, tucking the phone deep into my purse. "I just need to go home." Unraveling the lies. On the somber journey back to our now desolate home, the cryptic messages from the unknown sender relentlessly echoed in my mind, refusing to be silenced. Was it possible that someone was playing a cruel, depraved joke at the absolute lowest point of my life? Or, a terrifying counter-thought surfaced, was there a genuine, horrifying possibility that Ernest was indeed alive? But if he was alive, then who had we just buried? And if he wasn't alive, who possessed such intimate, damning details about our lives, about our sons, to craft such a chillingly specific message? That night, alone in my house, which now felt like a tomb, every shadow a haunting specter of Ernest's absence, I meticulously replayed every detail of the preceding days, searching for clues, for an explanation. Ernest's supposed accident had struck me as odd from the very beginning. Charles had claimed a machine had exploded in the shop, but Ernest, a man of profound meticulousness, knew every screw, every wire, every hidden mechanism in that place. He was obsessive about maintenance, a stickler for safety. Furthermore, how had my sons arrived at the hospital so swiftly if no one had notified them? I was the emergency contact. The hospital had called me first. How had they learned of the accident before I did? And then there was the money. From the very first day, Charles and Henry had spoken of insurance policies and beneficiaries with an unsettling ease, as if they had been anticipating this moment, meticulously preparing for it. My investigative instincts, dormant for too long under the weight of grief, finally stirred. I decided to examine Ernest's papers. In his old, sturdy wooden desk, a desk that had served him faithfully for decades, he kept all his vital documents secured within a metal box. Insurance policies, the deed to our house, documents pertaining to the shop, everything was there, meticulously organized. I found the $50,000 life insurance policy that Charles had so glibly mentioned, but as I scrutinized it, a detail I didn't recall surfaced, chilling me to the bone. The policy had been updated a mere 6 months prior, its coverage dramatically increased from a modest $5,000 to a staggering $50,000. Why had Ernest increased his life insurance so substantially and without a single word to me? More importantly, who had suggested he do it? I continued my search, my heart pounding with growing dread, and unearthed something even more disturbing. A workers' compensation policy, completely unknown to me, purchased just 2 months before his death, offering $5,000 in the event of an accidental death on the job. $15,000 in total, a fortune for a family like ours, yet also a sum tempting enough for someone utterly devoid of scruples. My phone vibrated again, jolting me back to the terrifying present. Another message from the same unknown number. Check the bank account, see who's been moving money. This time I didn't hesitate. This person, whoever they were, knew far too much to be dismissed as a prankster. They knew about the insurance. They knew about my sons. They knew intimate details that only someone incredibly close to us, someone deeply embedded in our lives, could possibly possess. The following day, fueled by a mixture of terror and determination, I went to the bank where Ernest and I had maintained our account for 30 years. Mrs. Thompson, the bank manager, a woman who had known us forever, greeted me with sincere, if somber, condolences. Heng, I'm so terribly sorry about Ernest. He was a good man. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, I replied, my voice thin but resolute. I came to check our accounts. I need to understand our financial situation. She produced the bank statements for the last 6 months, and what I saw froze me in place, every nerve ending screaming with alarm. Over the past 3 months, large unexplained withdrawals had been made from our savings account. $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, $4,000 in March. Substantial sums of money that I had absolutely no knowledge of being moved. Who authorized these withdrawals? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, trembling with a burgeoning fear. Your husband came in person, Mrs. Thompson explained, her brow furrowed in concentration. He said he needed the money for repairs at the shop. But I kept the household accounts, meticulously tracking every penny. I knew precisely how much money we possessed and exactly where it was spent. Ernest had never once mentioned expensive repairs at the shop, and we had most certainly never discussed withdrawing thousands of dollars from our carefully hoarded savings. Do you have the signatures for those withdrawals? I pressed. She presented the receipts. Indeed, the signatures bore a resemblance to Ernest's, but something about the handwriting seemed subtly off, too shaky, too uncertain for his usually firm, clear script. Mrs. Thompson, I asked, my heart pounding with a frantic rhythm, did he come alone to make these withdrawals, or was someone with him? She paused, lost in thought for a moment. Now that you mention it, she mused, I think he came in with one of your sons once or twice. Charles, I think. He said he was helping his dad with the paperwork because Ernest had trouble reading documents without his glasses. Charles, my son, involved in undisclosed money withdrawals, using his father's supposedly tired eyes as a convenient excuse. But Ernest saw perfectly well with his glasses, which he never, ever removed during the day. That afternoon, as I pored over the bank receipts again and again, each detail a fresh sting, another message arrived. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Ernest he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. I could no longer deny the overwhelming mountain of evidence piling up before me. The mysteriously increased insurance policies, the unauthorized money withdrawals, Charles's suspicious presence in transactions I knew nothing about, his chilling efficiency in organizing a perfunctory funeral, his unsettling coldness during his own father's agonizing last days. But the question that now truly terrified me was this: if they had indeed planned Ernest's death, how had they accomplished such a monstrous act? And who in this web of deceit was sending me these crucial, life-saving messages? Ernest's last secret. The following days devolved into an unbearable nightmare of gnawing doubt and paralyzing suspicion. Every one of Charles's smiles, every one of Henry's hugs, every word of superficial condolence felt like a grotesque mask, expertly hiding something far more sinister and insidious. Yet I desperately needed more tangible proof. irrefutable evidence before I could fully accept a truth as horrifying and unthinkable as the one slowly, inevitably taking shape in my tormented mind. My phone continued to vibrate with the arrival of messages from the mysterious, anonymous number. Go to Ernest's shop, look in his desk. There are things you didn't see. I decided, with a newfound surge of resolve, to visit the shop, a place I hadn't set foot in since the day of the supposed accident. Charles had claimed a machine had exploded, leaving my husband fatally injured. But when I arrived, what I found was radically, chillingly different from what I had been led to expect. The shop was eerily clean, meticulously so, far too immaculate to have been the scene of a violent explosion. There were no scorch marks marring the walls, no debris scattered across the floor, no lingering signs of the catastrophic destruction that such a serious accident should have undoubtedly caused. "Where is the machine that exploded?" I murmured aloud, my voice echoing in the unnerving silence. I searched every corner of the shop, every nook and cranny, only to find every single machine perfectly in its place, pristine and in working order. The welder, the compressor, the electric saw, all were intact, functioning flawlessly. What then had truly been the cause of Ernest's accident? In Ernest's desk, a piece of furniture as familiar as my own reflection, I found something that sent a bone-chilling dread through me, freezing the blood in my veins. A note written in his distinctive handwriting, dated just 3 days before his death. "Charles insists I need more insurance. He says it's for Heng, but something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions." Below that chilling revelation was another note, equally disturbing. "Henry brought me some papers to sign. He says they're to modernize the shop, but I don't understand what it's about. Why all the hurry?" My beloved husband had harbored suspicions. He had intuitively sensed the malevolent intentions of our own sons, the insidious darkness that had begun to consume them, but he had died before he could fully articulate his fears to me. I continued my frantic search, and there, tucked away in a hidden compartment, I found a sealed envelope, addressed simply with my name. I tore it open with trembling, desperate hands. It was a letter from Ernest. "My dearest Heng, if you are reading this, it means something terrible has happened to me. In recent months, I've noticed strange changes in Charles and Henry. They're far too interested in our money, in the insurance, in us selling the house. Jasmine, too, is putting a lot of pressure on them. Yesterday, Charles told me I should be more concerned about my safety, because at my age, any accident could be fatal. I don't know why, but those words sounded like a veiled threat. I love you, Heng. If something happens to me, please, don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons." The letter fluttered from my hands, landing softly on the dusty floorboards. Ernest had sensed his own impending death. He had seen the subtle, insidious signs that I, blinded by the profound, unwavering love of a mother, had tragically chosen to ignore. That night, Charles came to visit me again. He arrived with a bottle of wine and a smile that now seemed utterly, completely fake, a grotesque parody of genuine warmth. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about your future," he announced, pouring himself a glass of wine without even bothering to ask if I desired one. "The insurance money, it's already in process. It'll be $15,000. "How do you know the exact amount?" I asked, feigning an innocence I no longer felt, meticulously observing his reaction. "Well, I helped Dad with the insurance paperwork," he replied smoothly, a practiced ease in his voice. "He wanted to make sure you had enough money to live comfortably." A lie. A blatant, calculated lie. Ernest had never wanted to increase the insurance. According to his own heartbreaking note, he had been pressured, coerced by Charles himself. "And what do you think I should do with that money?" I inquired, carefully testing the waters, watching his eyes for any flicker of true intent. His eyes lit up, not with concern, but with a chilling glint that sent ice through my veins. "You could buy a smaller, cozier house, or even better, move into a nice retirement community where you'd have company and medical care. Henry and I could manage your money to make it go further, to really grow it." "Manage my money. We just want to take care of you, Mom," he added, his voice oozing with false solicitude. At your age, it's easy to get scammed or make bad financial decisions. We know about investments, about business. We could triple that amount in just a few years. Triple my money or make it disappear into their own avaricious pockets. Let me think about it, I said, my voice carefully neutral, desperately trying to buy myself some precious time. Of course, Jasmine chimed in, her fake sweetness curdling the air. But don't take too long. It's for your own good after all. After they finally left, I sat in my kitchen, trembling not only with fear, but with a searing, righteous rage. My own sons, my flesh and blood, had not only callously murdered their father, but now they were meticulously planning to steal every single thing I had left in the world. That night, my phone vibrated, delivering a message longer, more detailed than any before it. Tomorrow, go to the police station. Ask for the report on Ernest's accident. There are contradictions you need to know about. The horrifying truth unveiled. The very next day, a resolve hardening my spine, I made my way to the local police station. Sergeant O'Connell, a man who had known Ernest for many years, greeted me with a kind, if somewhat perplexed expression. "The report on your husband's accident?" he asked, a frown deepening on his brow. "What accident, Heng Yi?" "From his shop," I explained, my voice tight with suppressed emotion. "When the machine exploded." The sergeant checked his files, his confusion visibly deepening, and then shook his head. "We don't have any report of an explosion at Ernest's shop here. In fact, we don't have any report of a work accident involving your husband at all." The world tilted precariously beneath my feet. But my son said it was an accident at the shop. That's why he was in the hospital." Heng Yi," the sergeant continued, his voice now imbued with a somber seriousness. "Your husband arrived at the hospital on Tuesday morning, but not from a work accident. According to the medical report I have here, he arrived unconscious with symptoms of poisoning. They found traces of methanol in his blood, a quantity sufficient to cause blindness, severe brain damage, and eventually death. The hospital should have informed you of this poisoning. Poisoning. It hadn't been an explosion. It hadn't been a tragic work accident. Someone with malicious intent had deliberately poisoned my husband." "Why didn't anyone tell me this?" I asked, my voice cracking with a fresh wave of agony and outrage. "The immediate family who signed the hospital papers," the sergeant explained, his eyes filled with a new understanding, "requested that the information be kept confidential to avoid unnecessary speculation. They said you were too emotionally fragile to handle the technical details. The immediate family, Charles and Henry, they had concealed the true, horrific cause of Ernest's condition, fabricated the story of the explosion, and manipulated everyone, including me, to cover up a heinous murder. Heng Yi," the sergeant continued, his gaze unwavering, "if you suspect the circumstances of your husband's death, we could open a formal investigation." I had more than mere suspicions now. I was absolutely certain. My own sons had murdered their father for money. That afternoon, Henry arrived at my house, a bouquet of flowers clutched in his hand, and the same fake, sickening smile that Charles had mastered plastered across his face. "How are you, Mom? You look tired." "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a calmness I didn't feel, observing his every gesture, every nuance, from this terrifying new perspective. "I'm just thinking about the future." "That's good," he said too quickly. "Charles and I have been talking. We think you should sell the house soon while it's fresh on the real estate market." "Why the rush?" I pressed, my voice deceptively soft. "Well, old houses lose value quickly and you need liquidity. Funeral expenses, pending medical bills." More lies. The funeral had been cheap, almost insultingly so, and there were no pending medical bills because Ernest's hospital insurance had covered them all. "Henry," I said, meeting his eyes directly, holding his gaze with an unwavering intensity, "you knew your dad didn't die from a work accident." For a fleeting fraction of a second, I witnessed a flicker of sheer panic in his expression, a raw, undeniable fear. But he recovered with astonishing speed, erecting his false facade once more. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "I went to the police station. There's no report of an explosion at your dad's shop." This time the panic was far more evident, less easily concealed. "Mom, you shouldn't be doing things like that. They'll confuse you. The grief is getting to you." "The grief is getting to me, or you've been lying to me." He shot up abruptly, knocking over the coffee I had poured for him, the dark liquid spilling across the table like a stain. "I think you need to rest. We'll talk when you're calmer." He left swiftly, almost fleeing, but not before making a phone call from the porch, his voice hushed but urgent, worried. That night I received the most chilling, most revealing message yet. "They're coming together tomorrow. They're going to try to convince you that you're crazy, that grief is making you imagine things. Don't believe them, and don't take anything they offer you to eat or drink." The mysterious message's prediction came true with terrifying precision, exactly as it had warned. The very next day, Charles and Henry arrived together at my house, accompanied by Jasmine. They wore expressions of exaggerated concern, almost theatrical in their sincerity, and carried a bag of pastries from the downtown bakery. "Mom, we're so worried about you," Charles began,